Last thing, you can buy this kit from the link in the description, but this project is all open source. It was originally created as AVR Chip Basic by Jorg Wolfram, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name more or less correctly, and then continued as CB2 in this kit. All the source and schematics are available for free on the website if you want to check those out. But enough talking about tech specs, let's try it out and see what it really looks like. Let's start by plugging in the USB cable for the power supply. Then for the video, it's just a plain SCART cable. And then it turns out I didn't have any PS2 keyboards of the small connector like this one. But fortunately I had a PS2 to USB adapter, so I was able to plug in any modern USB keyboard. And there we go, all set up. Let's try it out. Cool, it boots up right away and we get this menu. So the menu already comes preloaded with several games, which is really cool. I wasn't expecting that, so let's try a few. That's pretty cool, especially the scrolling. It's not something that you often see in basic games. Okay, let's try Arkanoid. Okay, this is not very playable, but it's again a good example. The typical two-player Pong, cool. Too bad I'm the only one playing here. Oh, and again, another example of scrolling, this time vertical scrolling, and pretty smooth frame rate. Yeah, you can tell this computer has some serious specs. And this one, yep, a nice Pac-Man clone. I wanted to get more familiar with this particular basic and at the same time learn something more about the machine. So I decided to write a super simple program that moves a character around when you press the keys. And this loop just runs repeatedly. It's not waiting for vertical sync. So when we run this, the character just moves so fast, you can't even see it. If you wrote a similar program in BASIC in some 80s microcomputer, you would not get this kind of speed. One really nice feature of this BASIC is that it has a sync command. So if you change it to 1, it waits until the next vertical sync. And if you do that, then it moves at a much more reasonable pace. But the computer is mostly idle, just waiting for vertical sync. So I decided to push it a little bit more and just write, in a really dumb way, a bunch of characters to the screen. I'm sure there's much better ways to do this, but I actually wanted to see how many characters I could write to the screen independently to make the computer finally slow down. So I'm doing 6 rows of 30 characters plus the moving guy without any vertical sync, and it finally slows down to a more reasonable level. So that's a lot of characters. To achieve something like this, you would probably have to do this in assembly in an 80s microcomputer. One really cool feature of the CB2 is that at any point while you're running a basic program, you can break into it and go into a debugger. This is something I'm definitely not used to from the basic days in 8-bit computers. There you can see which line you're executing, you can move on to the next line, you can see the different registers, the stack, you can even toggle a memory view, see it as characters. I mean, it's pretty complete for what it is, so that's pretty awesome for developing for this microprocessor. On the other hand, the only way to create basic programs on this computer is through the full screen editor, which it sounds like a good idea in theory, but it's actually very limited. Even once I figure out that it does have copy and paste, thank you, it's limited to 1 line, which, yeah, it's not ideal, but I guess you can kind of manage. And then you're limited to 99 lines for the whole program, which is extremely limiting. Definitely not ideal to actually do any serious basic programming on this. So naturally, I turned to the section on how to connect the CB2 to the computer, thinking, well, at least I can write those 99 lines in a much better editor on the computer and then transfer it over to the CB2 because it's prepared for that. Unfortunately, the CB2's only way of communicating with the computer is through a serial port that we soldered earlier, that 9-pin port. Okay, I can deal with that, except that once you start looking at modern computers, it gets a lot more difficult to talk to a serial port. Fortunately, I had a USB to serial cable that I must have used for programming some firmware in some other device, so I was really excited about it and I went to try it, and then I realized they're both male connectors. Oops! Yeah, that won't work, so I won't be able to send any programs from my computer to the CB2. Bummer. But you aren't just limited to basic programs with the CB2. The website has a whole section on extensions you can have for the CB2. They'll rely on some extra hardware that can be interfaced with the CB2 and include things like an extra data flash module to have extra memory for, I believe, saving basic programs. There's a 64K memory expansion, which unfortunately is limited to only certain programs. So it's not like suddenly the basic programs can have 200 lines. And it even gets into things like network access and having S-video out and more advanced things like that. They're all very well described and include circuits and diagrams and everything that you need to build them. So in the end, what do I think of the CB2? It depends on how you think about it. As a beginner kit, it's actually pretty good. It's cheap, the components are easy to solder for the most part, the instructions are wonderful, and it's just very satisfying to build it in 30 minutes and turn it on and see it working. So that's great. As a basic microcomputer, it's a mixed bag. It's fast enough that you can write some basic programs without worrying too much about performance, and they work great. On the other hand, it's actually pretty limited in the editor itself, in the number of lines you can have per program, so you could never really write any complex basic programs. The connectivity, I'm not too crazy about. It has a SCART and a PS2 keyboard connector. If you really were aiming to make it as easy as possible to connect with modern devices, you would have an HDMI video port and a USB keyboard and maybe even get the power from there. And the connection to the computer itself, I think is something that should be really important to be able to upload new programs and things like that. And that's severely lacking with the serial port. So that's not ideal. Overall, I think it was a really fun project and it's cheap enough that I recommend people to go ahead and buy one and use it as their first building kit. And then maybe they'll find that they enjoy that kind of thing and order different kits that are more complicated, or maybe it will rekindle their interest in old computers and they'll start doing basic programming in a different computer. So it was a fun project anyway. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Until next video, see you then.